The morning light came slow across the Briggs farm, touching the frostbitten fields with dull gold sheen. Eleanor Briggs sat by the kitchen window, nursing a chipped mug of coffee, watching the mist roll low over the soil her father once called the family's backbone. At 58, she still woke before sunrise, out of habit more than purpose. The silence suited her. The house creaked like an old friend, and the wind through the barn slats hummed the same tune her late husband used to whistle while fixing fences. Her days were measured by small routines: feeding the chickens, patching the roof, sorting through old letters she couldn't throw away. The world beyond her land had moved on long ago. The town had grown shinier, louder, less forgiving. People waved from their cars, but never stopped anymore. To them, she was a widow on the hill, polite, quiet, perhaps a little strange. That morning, something different glinted at the edge of her field. She frowned, shielding her eyes. 3 men in neon vests stood by the fence, driving stakes into the soil, hammering them down like they were nailing shut a coffin. The sound broke the stillness. Thud, pause, thud. Each strike echoed down her spine. Eleanor stepped outside, coat half buttoned, her boots sinking into the damp earth. "Can I help you?" she called. One of the men looked up briefly, then back down at his clipboard. Another muttered something about county orders. "Orders for what?" she asked again, but no one answered. The orange stakes gleamed in a crooked line across her land, her father's land, cutting through it like a scar. The men packed up quickly, leaving behind their marks of intrusion and silence. Eleanor stood there long after they left, wind tugging at her sleeves, eyes fixed on that row of bright, foreign color in her field. By dusk, the fog had settled heavy. From a road below, headlights passed, slowing for a moment before speeding up again, as if the whole town already knew something she didn't. And by morning they did. By the next morning, the quiet hum of Eleanor's world had changed. The air itself seemed to carry whispers, voices that fell silent when she entered the post office, glances exchanged behind windows as she drove through town. On the bulletin board outside the diner, a single sheet of paper fluttered in the wind. Town council meeting. Proposal for community dog park. Beneath the bold letters, her address was printed plainly. Her farm. She drove home with trembling hands, the steering wheel slick with sweat. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, reading the notice again and again until the words blurred. Eminent domain. She mouthed the phrase, tasting its sharpness. They were taking her land, legally, cleanly, like it was just another transaction. At the meeting 2 days later, the town hall smelled of coffee and varnish. Rows of familiar faces filled the seats. People who had once shared casseroles after her husband's funeral, who had borrowed her tools and returned them with smiles. Now they avoided her eyes. Mayor Paul Kendrick stood at the front, smiling like a man doing God's work. His voice was polished, heavy with rehearsed warmth. "This project will bring families together," he said. "Green spaces improve property values, community spirit. By destroying mine?" Eleanor's voice broke through, sharp enough to silence the room. Heads turned. Paul's smile thinned. "Mrs. Briggs, the county will offer fair compensation." "Fair?" She laughed once, bitter and small. "You mean cheap." Julia Wren, the developer, leaned forward from the front row, her manicured hands folded. "We understand your sentiment, Eleanor, but progress." "Progress." Eleanor snapped. "You people don't even walk your dogs. You drive them to parks built over graves." Murmurs rippled. Someone muttered that she was being dramatic. Another whispered, "Poor woman," as if grief were madness. When the vote passed, unanimous, efficient, merciless, Eleanor sat frozen. Paper rustled, pens clicked, chairs scraped. Life moved on without her consent. Outside, rain began to fall in steady, cold lines. She didn't go home immediately. Instead, she drove the perimeter of her land, headlights sweeping across those orange stakes now half buried in mud. The council's letter waited in her mailbox when she returned, neat, official, and final. By morning, the surveyors would be back. And this time, she would not watch quietly. When the bulldozers came, Eleanor wasn't there to see them. The farmhouse stood silent, Curtains drawn, mailbox overflowing with unopened letters. Neighbors whispered as she finally broken. Sold the place and left town in shame. Someone claimed to have seen her boarding a bus at dawn with a single suitcase. By the second week, even the local paper wrote her off. Widow Briggs accepts counsel offer, but Eleanor hadn't gone anywhere. In a rented room above a closed feed store in the next county, she spent her days in silence, the hum of fluorescent lights her only companion. Her husband had once taught her how to navigate deeds and titles. Land is leverage, Ellie. Never forget that. Those words had been a comfort once. Now, they became her weapon. She studied property maps spread across the table, tracing roads with trembling fingers. Every gravel path, every sliver of dirt leading to her old fields, she marked them, cross-checked ownership, and made calls. Small parcels, forgotten lots, hunting leases. She bought them through quiet shell companies, using the savings her husband had left and every bit of credit she could scrape together. No one noticed. No one asked questions. In a town that had erased her, her absence was convenient. By the time the dog park project reached construction phase, Eleanor owned every inch of land that touched it. Legally, irrevocably. The first sign of trouble came when delivery trucks found lock gates where roads used to be open. Then the surveyors returned and discovered new fencing, taller, reinforced, unmarked. Private property, the signs read, each one signed EB Holdings. At night, she drove out and parked by the far fence line, headlights off, watching the men in hard hats argue in confusion. It wasn't joy she felt, not quite. It was something colder, quieter. They'd taken her home for a park. Now she owned every way in or out. And as the town began to panic, Eleanor finally smiled, not out of triumph, but out of unfinished purpose, because she wasn't done yet. The first trucks arrived before dawn, their headlights cutting through the fog like pale blades. When the drivers reached the main road, they found it blocked, steel gates welded shut, chains coiled like serpents, and signs reading private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. The town called it vandalism. Eleanor called it closure. She watched from the window of her farmhouse, the one she'd quietly bought back under another name. The land was hers again, though not in the way it used to be. On the local news, a young reporter stood in front of the barricades, shouting over the wind. Authorities suspect coordinated sabotage, she said, her words trembling. The park project remains indefinitely delayed. Eleanor muted the television. The silence in her living room was almost holy. Cameras she'd installed along the property line blinked faintly on her screen, capturing headlights turning away, men swearing under their breath. She didn't have to lift a hand anymore. Her plans had already sealed themselves into the soil. Mayor Paul Kendrick visited the site himself one evening, wearing his press coat and that same unshakable smile. She saw his car slow near the gate, idling too long. Then the camera feed flickered, static swallowing the image. When it cleared, the car was gone. For 3 days, search teams combed the woods and creek beds. Reporters called it an unfortunate accident. Some whispered about the unstable widow with cameras, fences, and too much land to patrol. Eleanor said nothing. She baked bread, fed the chickens, and left her porch light on through the night. When the sheriff came by to ask a few routine questions, she smiled politely, offered him tea, and listened to him describe the discovery. A vehicle overturned in the irrigation ditch, the body found downstream, face unrecognizable. When he left, she stood at her window again, staring out at the mist that never seemed to lift anymore. Somewhere beyond it, a gate creaked softly in the wind. She didn't feel victory, only stillness, deep and wide as the fields. The town stayed quiet for weeks. Then, one morning, a new notice appeared on her mailbox. Proposal for community memorial garden. This time, she didn't tear it down. She just smiled, slow, unreadable, and went to sharpen the lock on her gate.